Hello one and all, welcome to Seen Through Glass. Now nearly 5 years ago I made a video which asked the question as to whether in 2020 it was a good time to buy a used Aston Martin V12 Vantage S. I filmed the video just before the first COVID lockdown, and without knowing what was about to unfold, I just felt like V12 Vantages represented great value on the used market. Well, today I want to revisit that topic because, of course, we're out of the COVID lockdowns. The world has changed a lot in the last 5 years. Aston Martin has changed a lot in the last 5 years. But V12 Vantages still represent great value on the used market. And I'm going to pitch to you that while some of the newest Aston Martin products might be some of their best, it's actually the old V12 Vantage that's the Aston Martin I think you should be buying in 2025. The V12 Vantage launched all the way back in 2009. Aston Martin had taken the engine from the DBS and put it into their smallest car. It produced around 510 horsepower through a 6-speed manual gearbox. Around 1,200 of those original cars were built, and it quickly gained a reputation as Aston Martin's most exhilarating sports car. And let's not forget, it was the focus for one of the most emotive and cinematic Top Gear features ever. And more on that later. 5 years on, a convertible version came out, but production was actually limited to just 101 cars, making it actually the rarest of the kind of main V12 Vantage production versions. Vantage owners wanting more power had their wishes granted with the announcement of the V12S in 2013. The V12S's capacity was still 5.9 litres, but power is now up to 565 horsepower. Gone was the 6-speed manual. It was replaced by a lighter 7-speed semi-automated Sport Shift 3 gearbox. The S also featured adaptive damping, quicker steering, and a new ECU. Naturally, there was then a convertible version, but this time production was not limited. However, it's suspected that less than 400 V12S Roadsters were made, so still pretty rare. And then finally, Aston offered a manual version of the V12S, but this time with a 7-speed dogleg first gearbox. That was a nod to the sort of old V8 Astons of yesteryear. That gearbox got automatic throttle blipping on downshifts, and upshifts were actually possible without lifting off the throttle. Only around 260 of those manual V12Ss were made. Then there were a load of special editions like the GT12, a car which I adored, the AMR versions, the V12 Zagato, the V600, just to name a few. Long story short, the V12 Vantage was a very successful car for Aston Martin, and you are not short of models to choose from. So today I'm down at Hilton and Moss. Some of you might remember this is where I bought my Challenge Stradale for its paint inspection earlier in the year, and a bit of an Easter egg for you. It's where my Challenge Stradale is getting repainted this winter. More on that to come in a video very soon. But the reason I'm down here today is because they actually have quite a few V12 Vantages knocking around. I want to kick things off today by looking at this, a standard 2014 V12 Vantage S. Firstly, because it kind of picks up where that video from 5 years ago left off. In that video, I focused on and featured a V12S, so let's continue from there. But also, if you are considering buying a V12 Vantage in 2025, this is kind of going to be your entry point. The most affordable cars that come to the UK used market are these standard V12Ss. And it may surprise you that the sort of later, more powerful variant is often cheaper than the earlier car, but it's all down to that Sport Shift gearbox. I already mentioned it, that semi-automated single clutch box, which, well, history has kind of shown us wasn't fantastic. And if we're honest, Aston Martin shouldn't have really still been putting it in their cars in 2014. They should have maybe tried to fit a ZF Auto like they did with the Vanquish S, or developed a dual clutch system, but they didn't. And considering that that means that these are the kind of most affordable ways into a V12 powered Vantage, they cannot be overlooked. Every time I drive one of these cars, I think, is this the one that got away? There are so many videos on this channel of me driving, looking at, talking about this era Vantage, saying, oh, nearly bought one, I should have bought one, I could have bought one. It's never really quite happened. Maybe this is the turning point, who knows? But anyway, with these V12 Vantage S's, the connoisseurs, the collectors out there will tell you, oh yeah, the 7-speed's the one to have, the dogleg manual gearbox, but I never really liked that gearbox. I could never really figure out where I was in the actual box. I kind of get lost. It was all a bit mushy feeling. The clutch was a bit awkward. When you got up to speed, it just, you were thinking more about, okay, hold on a sec, which gear am I going into, rather than actually focusing on the driving experience. And that's not just because it was a dogleg, it just wasn't ideal. And we must not forget that this V12 Vantage S was designed with the sport shift system in mind. So it kind of all comes together to be one. And like I mentioned earlier, it's not bad, this system. You know, it's so funny because these days we all sit there and we say, oh, you know, new cars, they're too robotic, they're too perfect, they've dialed out any character, any feeling. Then we get to something like this and we go, oh yeah, gearbox is crap. You can't have it both ways. At some point, you've got to let something go. If you want to step back into this kind of old school charm, these modern classics, you've got to accept a gearbox that isn't going to be razor sharp. And okay, fine, this kind of setup was all right in 2009 and 2010. By 2014 or 15, it was slow, a bit like with the Aventador. But yeah, as long as you drive around it, never leave it in auto. Always put it immediately into the manual gear select mode, and just be aware that there's going to be a bit of a lag and a bit of a kick. And it's so rewarding. It really lets you know when you're changing gear. And you have to think about changing gear. It's not all just doing it seamlessly like a brand new car does. That new Vantage, as good as it is, irons out the changes so you hardly know they happen. And then that naturally aspirated V12. How an engine can be so smooth and then so raw and animalistic, I just don't know. It is one of the greatest modern sports car engines, this V12, but I love everything else about this Aston. The size, it was always a good size, but it's even better now that cars have got bigger and bigger. The seating position, the visibility, everything's where I need and want it to be. These seats aren't particularly sporty, but they're very comfortable and I don't feel like I'm sitting too high. Like, it all is just yes, and then you're kind of seated well in the car. It gives you so much confidence to just get on it and position it. It is really leery, like it will step out whenever you want it to, but you can also pick up speed and move along the road in such a nice way. I do adore these things. As I say, at 80 grand, maybe you could go to a private seller or get lucky with a dealer and be closer to 70. What a lot of car for the money. And I guarantee your neighbor who's not into cars, or your cousin or your girlfriend, whoever it might be, will think that this is a 200 grand car. That is the point. Really special bits of kit. Now let's pretend like you are manual obsessed. You couldn't imagine anything worse than a dodgy, flappy pedal gearbox in your V12 Vantage. Well, let me present you this. Well, actually not this, but this. You now find me in an original V12 Vantage, just a roadster variant. But these original cars came, as I mentioned, only with the 6-speed manual gearbox. And this is a delight. It's actually not spectacular in terms of its feel, its action. Still pretty mushy, but it's way better than the 7-speed and gives you a completely different experience. Only 101 of these cars were made. These are sought after bits of kit. They go for well over 100 grand. Hilton and Moss sold this to somebody not that long ago, and actually he keeps it in their storage facility upstairs. And they begged and pleaded for him to let me have a go today, and he agreed. But it's a very, very short test drive. I'm essentially doing 500 meters, but just to get a sense of what's going on and to be able to talk about the appeal of these earlier cars. So yes, firstly, you got the manual. I haven't got to think about dodgy semi-automated single clutch gearboxes. I'm way more in control. It's an even more analog and authentic experience because slightly older car. It's all just a bit more raw and aggy anyway. Haven't even activated sport mode yet. There we go, let's turn that on. So suddenly it just feels a bit more, or even more emotive and exciting. And the funny thing is, because Aston Martin didn't really change the Vantage interior-wise or design-wise in the interior that much, I couldn't really tell you that I'm in an older car. Sitting here like this, it all looks and feels largely the same, which is no bad thing. So yeah, if you've got slightly deeper pockets, you haven't got to get the cheapest V12 Vantage on the market, I wouldn't look to spend an extra 20 or 30 grand on a 7-speed dogleg V12S. I would spend 5 or 10 grand more and get a 6-speed V12 Coupe, the non-S. I think that could be the pick of the bunch. It does change maybe how you're going to use the car. It changes the car's vibe, but having a manual V12 from this era, yeah, that's pretty win. This Roadster, by the way, is stunning. It's a bit of a cloudy, drizzly day today, but dry enough to get the roof down. If you saw the roof up, it's got this incredible sort of suede red, what would you call that? Headlining, I suppose. Very cool car, very cool opportunity. I actually hadn't driven one of these Roadsters before, and it's yeah, lives up to the hype slightly. But yeah, these are bigger money. Once you start going over 100k, you've got to start questioning what's going on, I think. But yeah, very cool. Well, obvious, naturally aspirated V12 driving emotion aside, why is it that I'm suggesting the V12 Vantage should be the Aston Martin you buy in 2025, especially when, as I mentioned in the intro, the latest range from Aston is so good. DB12 is superb. I kind of adore that car. I think it might be the best daily super GT on the market. The new Vantage is pretty great. A lot of people love it. I think the DBX has figured itself out. Now it's got the latest infotainment system in it, and everyone says the Vanquish is pretty superb. But I'm asking you to forget all of those and step into a car that's 10 or in some cases 15 years old. Well, there's the obvious, the price, but let's forget about that for a second. The V12 Vantage represents the best of yesteryear, the peak of an era which is turning out to be one of the greatest for drivers' cars. I went back and watched the Top Gear feature on the original V12 Vantage the other day, and not only is it one of their best, it's actually quite eerie. I mean, Jeremy Clarkson essentially predicts the future. He realizes in that moment it's the end of a certain type of car. We were never going to see that formula replicated again by Aston Martin or really any other sports car manufacturer. We know new cars are bigger, they're heavier, they have more electronics on them than most 10-year-old laptops. They are plagued with intrusive and undesirable safety systems. Emission regulations mean their exhaust and engines are quiet if they're not also hybridized or at least downsized. The funny thing is, in 2016, when the Vantage was kind of coming to the end of its production run, it was easy to kind of knock its interior, say that it felt a bit dated and behind the competition. But as a classic, it doesn't really matter about the infotainment systems. The design has completely grown into its own, and the simplicity is something to be adored in this modern age. As we continue to grow our appreciation for cars from the late 90s and noughties, I think these VH platform Astons, which obviously includes the V12 Vantage, but also the likes of the iconic James Bond DBS, the Vanquish, the Rapide, they're only going to grow in desirability. And then if we come back to price, not only are most of these V12 Vantages half the price of a new Aston Martin, they've also been fairly safe places to put your money over the last 5 years. I went back and watched that video I made in 2020, and back then I said if you wanted to buy a V12 Vantage S from an Aston Martin dealer, you'd be looking to spend around £80,000. Well, today, at the end of 2024, going into 2025, if you wanted to buy a V12 Vantage S from an Aston Martin dealer, you'd be looking to spend around £80,000. Yeah, the price basically hasn't changed. Now that's obviously not free motoring. We've got to consider things like maintenance, insurance, other running costs, and we'll come back to that in a second. But it does suggest you could go and buy one of these cars enjoy it for 2 or 3 years, and then sell it for fairly close to what you paid for it. The same could not be said if you went and bought a brand new Aston Martin. Aston Martins have historically always depreciated pretty quickly. They just lose a ton of money the minute you drive them away from the dealer. So yeah, it's just another reason why I think one of these makes way more sense than a brand new 2025 Vantage. But I get it, maybe the idea of a modern classic V12 Aston Martin just terrifies you, because surely it's going to be insanely expensive to run. Well, let's break it down. Servicing is done annually. It's likely to cost between £1,000 and £3,000, depending on what extras you might need to get done on top of the annual service. Batteries are a weak point on these cars, and a dead battery can lead to other issues, so you want to make sure you can keep it somewhere where it can be on trickle charge. Other electrical gremlins do creep in, but they're relatively easy to fix. Having asked around, the only real big jobs you want to avoid are having to replace the clutch and brakes. Clutches will at best last around 30,000 miles, but that could be a lot less if, for example, it's a sport shift system that's been driven heavily in town. It's a 4 or 5k job to replace the clutch, so you really want to check clutch wear before you're buying. Ceramic brakes are unlikely to need to be replaced through wear, but they can get damaged, and if you do have to replace a set, you're looking at around £10,000. So like with any big engine prestige sports car from this era, there are things to be aware of. But if you were to buy from an Aston Martin dealer and you get that timeless manufacturer warranty, or find one with a good warranty in place, then in theory, and this is mad maths, ladies and gentlemen, you could run one of these cars for, let's say, 2 years, and it costs you only, and I'm saying only in inverted commas, around 10 or worst case £15,000. I mean, depending on how good a deal you get on the way in. And I'm not sure there are many other Aston Martins that represent such relatively good value motoring. Now, I think I've already said that if you are considering spending well over 100 grand at one of these early V12 Vantages, maybe you need to sort of stop and reconsider your position, start considering some of the newer Aston Martin range. But let's just pretend for a second you're Billy Big Bucks, you don't care about throwing caution to the wind. Let me introduce you to one of my all-time favourite Aston Martins, I think potentially the best V12 Vantage S ever made. This is the Spitfire edition. Just 8 of these cars were made to commemorate 80 years of the Spitfire, obviously an iconic British warplane. Aston Martin have done a number of these kind of aviation specials. I think there was like a DB11 Concorde edition or a DBS Red Arrows. I lose track because this is the only one I've ever paid attention to because it is sensational in my mind. Mechanically, this is just a V12 Vantage S. I think 7 out of the 8 cars have the manual gearbox. This is the only sport shift car in the world. It's all about the details created by the Q department or division at Aston Martin. They just went to town with kind of linking this thing back to a Spitfire. Firstly, we have the green, which is a custom green. I think it's Duxford green, which was the home of the Spitfire, I believe. But anyway, very nice dark green. And then you've got these yellow details and accents, which kind of link to the yellow details on a Spitfire's wings. So here on the grille, there's some pinstriping down the side, which we'll see in a second. I love that the vents, the grills on the bonnet are body colored rather than the usual exposed carbon fiber. It just makes it a little bit more elegant. We've got dry and gloss carbon fiber on the front. I believe these numbers are serial numbers of Spitfires. I think each car has a different serial number, is linked to a different plane. I'm sorry if I got that wrong. But a lot of the really special stuff is inside in the interior. I mean, look at that tan leather. I think it's called Kestrel tan, another sort of bespoke color. And then check out the floor mats, sheepskin floor mats, which kind of, reminiscent of a Spitfire pilot's jacket, which is unbelievably cool to see. I love this, the kind of remove before flight pulleys on the actual door. And then check out, it's kind of dry carbon fiber with that tan leather. You've got the red details there on the handbrake, reminiscent of sort of pulleys and levers in a Spitfire. You've got the custom green Q by Aston Martin side sill. They managed to get the RAF kind of, roundel there in a very clever way on the central console. And you've got that number, that serial number once again on the sort of dash there. There are some Spitfire logos on the headrest, and then there's like an actual illustration of Duxford Aerodrome on the headlining. I mean, that is wild. And then even cooler than all these incredible details is that each Spitfire edition also came with, hold on a sec, let me just pop open this boot, Spitfire pilots jackets. I mean, these things are seriously high quality. There you go. And jacket, I imagine they cost about 10 grand alone. You also got goggles and a helmet. So cool. So yeah, I mean, big money, this stuff. I think you're looking at usually around the 175, 180 grand mark, which is what they cost from new. This car advertised at 150 grand because it is the sport shift, so theoretically the less desirable car. But as I keep banging on about in this video, I mean, forget that. But yeah, I mean, if you're spending 150 grand on an older V12 Vantage, I think you are a collector. I think if you're going to spend that much money just as an enthusiast, I would look at some of the newer products because they are just that good. But I mean, what a thing. I would have this in a heartbeat if I had the money. It is so cool. Well, there you have it. That's why I think the V12 Vantage is the Aston Martin to buy in 2025. Do you agree? If not, let me know in the comments below, which Aston Martin would you dream of buying, or are you considering buying in 2025? I'd be interested to know. Huge thanks to Hilton and Moss for facilitating this video. If you want to see some videos of me sort of driving Vantages a little harder or for a little longer, there are plenty of those videos on the channel that you can go and check out if you're interested in the cars that you've seen apart from the red. I don't think the red Roadster's for sale. Anyway, if you're interested in Vantages, clearly the guys at Hilton and Moss know what they're doing, so you can get in touch with them. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.